The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. My name is Erin Page, and I'm the Senior Law Librarian on staff here at Fast Case Legal Research. Thank you for joining us for today's session on federal legislative history. Before we begin, we have a couple of quick announcements. The first announcement and reminder, today is a tips and information session. That means it's going to be content that's useful to your practice, things that you can access when you're working from home to improve your legal research process. However, today's session is not for CLE credit. It is just a short informational session with tips and tricks and things that are useful for your practice. We do offer CLE sessions. Those sessions are offered on Thursday afternoons at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And you can sign up for those CLE sessions at our webpage, fastcase.com/support. Again, for CLE sessions, please do feel free to join us. The sessions are free. They're offered on Thursday afternoons at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, and you can sign up for them at fastcase.com/support. Alrighty. So with that brief introduction, I'm going to turn things over to our presenter today. Our presenter is going to be Ken Strickland, and I'll let him finish his introduction.
All right, everyone. Thanks for coming out. So my name is Ken. As Erin had just mentioned, I am the newest reference attorney with FastCase. I am based in the West Coast. So now for individuals, Oregon, Washington State, anyone on the West Coast, California, et cetera, you now have a designated person to assist needs. For people on the East Coast, if your evenings are just not full of great TV and you want to just knock out some research, it also means that I'm available for you until 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to assist with your research queries. Now, if this is your first time coming to these work from home Wednesday sessions, they're really designed to be 20-minute or less sessions that's really designed to help you hone a legal skill or accomplish a legal task. I like to say that we're going to teach you this in less time than it takes to get a delivery from Uber Eats. So diving right in, on your screen, we have this sort of 5 best practices, 5 strategies, or 5 rules, if you will, on really maximizing the ease and the efficiency with which you conduct federal legislative research. Now, one caveat I will add is when you're talking about federal legislative history research, I really stop these kind of tips and tricks at the part where the president is signing an act into law. So for discussions around slips, opinions, and things of that nature, that is a different session for a different day. So the 5 really best practices, the 5 tips that I've put together from years of researching legislative history on the federal stage is the following. So learn the legislative process, do your digging on a dime, get to know GovInfo and compilations, stop ignoring executive intent, and follow usage rules. So let's dive right into number 1. Learn the legislative process. So one of the biggest hurdles that I have people tell me when they're starting their federal legislative history inquiry or research is, I have no idea about the type of document I'm looking for, because once you start, and if you've already conducted a decent amount of federal legislative history research, you will notice that Congress and the GPO, they really like to name our legislative history documents with similar names. So I've located a great graphic for you that really shows you the legislative process in a nice kind of graphical format. So this is really laying out everything for you from the start of the bill to the end of the law. Now, I really like this graphic because it's quite detailed, and it really tells you exactly what you're looking for at every stage of the sort of legislative process or the creation of a law. I will send this graphic out for you. I really encourage you to take some time to actually understand the entire process. Now, the reason why this is important is because one example would be when we talk about committee reports. There are actually 3 different types of committee reports. You have a committee report that happens when you're first discussing the kind of original bill text that's within a committee in either chamber of Congress. You have a separate committee report that happens when one chamber of Congress meets outside of the individual proposing committee, and then you have a final committee report that occurs if the House and the Senate cannot agree on the text of a bill. So it's really important to understand what you're looking for at every stage of the legislative process. So let's minimize this and talk about the kind of second step. So like I said, I will send that image out for you if you have any questions. Remember, you can always email legislative history questions to support@fastcase.com. I love answering them, so send me all that you have. So the second one is do your digging on a dime. The biggest kind of, I would say that the second largest complaint I hear about when people are conducting legislative history research is, why is it so expensive? Because our first thought is we are going to go to a commercial database and we're going to, use that to conduct our legislative history research. And while this viewpoint may not make me popular among commercial repositories, I'm happy to tell you that every bit of your legislative history research can be conducted without spending a dime of money. It can be conducted with as much ease and with actually a lot more expeditiousness than you would get from a commercial database. Any of our major kind of paid commercial databases actually experience somewhere between a 2-day to a 14-day delay on the transferring of a legislative history document to placement within that commercial repository. Now, the reason being is that the GPO back in 1994, the Government Publishing Office, actually has now assumed kind of unified control over the publication process of all of our legislative history documents. So what they're doing, what's causing this delay, is they are going in and they're redacting anything they think could be relevant to confidentiality, could be relevant to concerns around national security, and that explains the delay. Now, the nice part about using our free sources, which we're going to talk about in step 3, or in tip 3, is that your delay goes from 2 to 14 days to sometimes a matter of hours, because that redaction is occurring with much more ease of, so you're redacting and then you're placing it within that kind of nice, seamless free repository without all the coding delays that happens when you're redacting for a commercial audience. And the last thing I'll say about why you want to do your legislative history research with free sources is that oftentimes what paid repositories don't tell you is that they may receive additional redaction on legislative history documents that does not take place within the free repositories or the official kind of free repositories themselves. So if you're paying for legislative history research, stop immediately. The only really benefit we're going to get from a paid legislative history repository is if you're seeking annotations. So if you want to know what experts in the field of legislative history or other legal experts have to say about your legislative history documents, is when you really get that value added from using a commercial repository. But let's talk about these kind of free repositories by focusing on number 3, getting to know GovInfo and Compilation. So we're going to pull up my web browser really quick and let's talk about GovInfo. Now, if you do not know GovInfo, I need you to stop whatever you're doing and go to govinfo.gov immediately after this webinar and just click around. So GovInfo, as I mentioned before, when the GPO took over the sort of unified publication of every major federal legislative history document, they built this beautiful and easily searchable and easily accessible repository for us, available free of charge. And when I tell you that it works beautifully, I am not exaggerating. Now, for some of you, you may be already doing legislative history research at congress.gov. The reason why I use govinfo.gov and not congress.gov, even when I'm looking at legislative history documents dealing with Congress is that they're still dealing with a lot of really complicated Boolean searches and terms and connector searches and tag match searches, whereas govinfo.gov, for me, who likes to just type in what I'm thinking or who likes to be able to browse by category, is much easier for me when I'm conducting my legislative history research. So from here on our main page, you can see a number of things right off the bat. You can see that you have the ability to pull up your legislative history documents by individual House and Senate committee. Now, for these committee by committee documents, they are updated in real time in often 60 minutes or less. So we talked about that delay that comes with commercial repositories. Here, it's extremely fast. The developer that actually created this used to work for Google and is this kind of data transmission genius. I don't know how he does it, but he's a genius. If we come down, we have the A to Z. We also have a search bar that allows us to search with either natural language, or if you want to get fancy, you can come up here to the Advanced tab here and do your traditional Boolean operator and terms and connectors searches. Now, if we scroll down, we also, over here on this category here, we have the full list of every type of legislative history document. So we're going to have our record, our reports, our annotated constitution, our bills, et cetera, et cetera. One thing to pay attention to on the left-hand side of govinfo.gov is going to be the congressional record. Now, if you're not currently a peruser of the congressional record is a daily publication that comes out when either chamber of Congress is in session, that compiles every bit of your legislative history research for you in a nice newsletter type format. It's going to cover your meetings. It's going to include the full text of speeches given during hearings and debates. It's also going to oftentimes have the full text of witness interviews. So typically what happens when you're looking at your let's say you're watching a committee hearing on television, what will happen is they will say, okay, well, give us a 5-minute kind of succinct version that you're going to present in front of the committee that's often televised, and then they will typically publish the full version of that witness or that representative's statement inside of the congressional record. And you can find the congressional record by clicking here. So I encourage you to really pay attention to that congressional record. Now, the nice thing about having the search bar up top is you can actually do keyword searches. And if you click on your advanced tab here, you can do a keyword search and narrow down within the full text of the congressional record. So it really is designed to make it extremely easy to access. So this is our GovInfo. Now, the other nice thing about our GovInfo is that we also have a small version of what I was talking about before about the benefit from a commercial repository, that sort of annotated value that comes from certain types of materials. For congressional reports, so a congressional report is going to be the report that is published once we're transmitting an official bill to the president to sign. They do provide annotations on govinfo.gov for most major bills under this congressional report link here. Now, the other free source that I really like is known as a legislative history compilation. So a compilation is essentially a fancy way of saying other people have went out into the universe around a major bill and collected every bit of the legislative history around that bill or act, put it together in a single PDF, made it public, and allow you to search it, or have allowed you to search it. Grammar today. So the best place to go to look for compilations is going to be one of my favorite places, which is going to be this lovely site here from the Librarian Society of Washington, D.C. I will be sending out these links so you don't have to worry about writing them down. Now, the Librarian Society of Washington, D.C. actually compiles together and updates it 4 to 6 times a year a compilation of legislative history for pretty much every major law that has happened in the United States. If you see, we're scrolling. Now, they organize this list of our legislative history compilations alphabetically by the popular name of the law or act, and then you're able to access the sort of compilation by clicking any of the hyperlinks beside the name of the bill. So if we were looking, for example, at the Civil Rights Act of 1964, we would click this link right here, and it would take us to the full compilation of legislative history. Now, what does a compilation look like? Let me show you. So we come right over here. This is going to be our free and publicly accessible legislative history compilation for the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Now you can see up here in the right-hand side, you have the ability to search within the text of the legislative history, even with it being from, decades in the past. You also have the ability to download this full compilation. And if you're scrolling through, you'll see that a compilation of legislative history for an act or bill is going to include every single thing for you. So it's going to include the full text of the bill. It's going to include every version. So let's say that every individual committee went through and they made 7 alterations to the suggested text of a bill. The compilation of a legislative history is going to reflect the various types of changes to that bill text. So it's going to do things like redline and show you the changes in things like the bill text. It's also going to compile for you things like the full text of your debates. It's also going to compile your congressional reports, et cetera, et cetera. I really encourage you once more to allow other people, don't reinvent the wheel, and go through that compilation list, because they do a really good job of continuing to update the compilations with every amendment that occurs with a major act. So moving on to, away from these free sources, on to item number 4, which is also kind of still tying into a free source, which is stop ignoring executive intent. So I know that most people on this webinar listen to the news. So what we know from this day and age is that more and more legal and sort of legislative change or regulatory change is occurring via executive orders. But we also know that when we're dealing with the sort of legislative process generally, that there is a stage where the president is signing that act into law. What a lot of people don't know is that there's actually a free compilation of executive documents. So this compilation is called the very, very unique name of Compilation of Presidential Documents. So what a compilation of presidential documents contains is things like, if there's an executive order that has been published, it's going to be placed in the compilation of presidential documents. When the president signs a bill or act into law, the president is given the option to publish what they call a signing statement. So oftentimes, for example, if both chambers of Congress is trying to present a bill or act that the president is deciding to veto, he will write out a signing statement that explains why he is or is not signing that bill. Sometimes a signing statement can be as simple as, we're doing this to benefit the veterans. Other times it can be, as what happens when we often have sort of, we'll call it more competitive legislation, where you have parts of Congress that are not agreeing, though oftentimes these statements can be as long as 17, 18 pages. It really gives you the ability to dive into the kind of thought of the president when the bill or act was being signed or was not being signed. It also gives you the ability to get things like the full text of presidential speeches, the full text of presidential commentary. So, for example, if you are tuning in right now to the COVID-19 kind of daily briefings, they're doing a similar thing where you have Fauci, for example, coming out and making a brief statement about the sort of direction that public health is going with regards to handling the pandemic. And then they will often publish the larger version of such statements within the compilation of presidential documents. Now, with regards to the compilation of presidential documents, there is a slight delay because we are talking about the GPO is coming in and they're actually pulling all of these sources and compiling them together. If you want a more real-time access to a presidential document, you can actually leave the compilation and come back over to GovInfo, and there's actually a category up here for presidential documents. Now, this will give you, the presidential documents link here, will give you an item-by-item list of new presidential documents that have not yet been moved into the compilation of presidential documents. So you have to kind of look through the list a little more actively because they're not put together in a nice single PDF for you. However, it avoids that typical, with compilation of presidential documents, you're looking at somewhere between like a 3 and 5 day delay. This allows you to kind of get around it by giving you a little more expeditiousness with where they're putting the documents. And then I know we're at 21 minutes, so we're going to jump right over to the last one, which is following litigation rules. So I'm actually going to send out to you as well a nice concise list of legislative history usage rules in litigation. So there's been, since the heyday of Scalia, ongoing war between what we call sort of our textualists and our kind of purpose-based individuals. I believe they call them purposivists. So textualists say, okay, well, there's really no place in litigation or for the use of legislative history. The other kind of camp of people say, okay, well, legislative history can be used, but in certain instances. So the trends we're seeing with regards to, we're pulling together all of this legislative history research. So the trend we're seeing with regards to these rules is that across the board in most federal circuits, the use of federal legislative history has really been delegated to two categories. Number one, the most common one, which is to clarify a term or a concept within a statute where it is determined that Congress did not intentionally omit that explanation. And then the other kind of more, we'll call it debatable use that gives people the most kind of controversy is this new growing usage of federal legislative history research, which is to kind of alter public policy consequences. So when a statute is passed, oftentimes what is happening is people are going into court and arguing that a statute has created a public policy consequence or an impact on society that was not intended by the original proposers or by Congress at the time of passing that statute. So you have certain judges that are entertaining the idea of interpreting a statute differently based upon the ability of the statute to kind of alleviate unintended consequences on society. So it's sort of an expansion of that old constitutional law idea of if a judge is able to interpret a statutory provision or term in a way that kind of marginalizes or narrows constitutional considerations, they're going to interpret that provision that way. Now, with this growing trend of sort of these two pathways of limiting usage or usages of federal legislative history research, this great group of researchers from UC Berkeley and the University of Washington have developed these, we'll call them canons of, or these rules, if you will, of legislative history usage. So I'm going to send you out a list of those rules, explore them, check out the citations attached to them, and really kind of focus on, once you've pulled all of these documents, when they can be best used. So I'll give you a nice preview. One of the most interesting kind of rules that I've discovered from examining these court cases and examining this research is the idea of when a person is using federal legislative history documents in a criminal proceeding, there is a growing trend where judges will not interpret a statutory provision or an ambiguous statutory provision in a manner that will deprive a criminal defendant of any type of legal right. So if there is a questionable provision, they're going to interpret that provision in a way that is beneficial to a criminal defendant. So that's, once more, it kind of falls in the second camp of that category of recognizing legislative history research as a way to kind of better impact societal consequences, defining ambiguous terms or concepts within a statute itself. All right, we're 6 minutes over. That is all I have for you. I'm going to now free you up. Erin, is there anything else you wanted to add? Otherwise, expect an email with number 1, this recording, and number 2, with all of the promised documents, the images, the links to the various sites we've talked about, the list of the rules, and that nice concise list of these litigation usage kind of rules or canons from the various studies that I just talked about.
I personally want to say thank you for a fascinating quick dive into the federal legislative history process. Now I want to see those canons in high gory detail, and it's been a while since I've looked at them, so I'm very excited to get that myself. Thank you everyone for joining us for today's session. Please keep an eye out for the links for our future sessions, including our Friday sessions, which are great resources, again, not for CLE credit, but other interesting topics that can be of use to you in your practice. We'll also have future Wednesday sessions, so keep an eye out for announcements on social media and in your email for our future webinars. And a reminder, if you're interested in CLE credit webinars, you can sign up for those on our website at fastcase.com/support. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and we hope you'll join us again.